Hello, folks, joining us on this sunny Friday in New York City and wherever you're coming from. We're going to get started in just a bit. If you have a moment, drop in the chat where you're joining us from. And again, we'll get started in just a couple minutes. Hello, where are you joining us from? Drop it in the chat. Matt Davidson from England. Good to have you out. Hello from India. Hello in caps. How are you? Aditya, good to see you. Dev, hi. All right, we are 2 minutes in. Hello again, Algeria. Very cool. We're going to go ahead and get started. To introduce myself, my name's Jay. I am president of the fellowship, all things product operations, and what we work on and the projects that we collect for our fellows. Before MLH, I worked at General Assembly in a variety of different roles for a long time. And when I'm not at MLH, I am trying to snowboard. I'm usually in a yoga studio, and I wrote some really bad code a few years ago. And that's pretty much me. And joining me today are a handful of alumni of the program coming on, not in order of my screen, but I'm going to go ahead and ask them to introduce themselves, starting with Autumn, if you'd be so kind.
Yes, absolutely. Hello, Jay, and hello to the Twitch chat as well. My name is Autumn Chu. I am a former participant in the MLH Fellowship. I was in the fellowship for the summer and winter of last year. So during the summer, I worked with Facebook, learning about production engineering, also known as site reliability engineering, depending on whether you work for Facebook or Google. Basically, everything that it takes to keep computers and servers up and running, that's the stuff that I was learning. And then with GitHub over the winter, I worked with them to build this YAML parser for some internal services. I can get into that later, but yeah, I've been with MLH a couple of times and I had a really great time for both sessions.
Awesome. Thanks, Autumn. Ashika, if it looks like Ashika's still loading there. Guillermo, do you want to go next? Oh, there's Ashika. Let's go back to Ashika. All right, let's go to Ruth. Ruth, you
yeah, sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Rue. I am now a software engineer at GitHub, and I was at the fellowship in the fall in track 4.2.1 and was placed at GitHub. So that is how I ended up there. It was an unbelievable experience for me. Yeah.
Awesome. And do we have Ashika yet, or are we still having some technical issues here? Looks like we're having some. Oh,
yeah, she looks a little bit frozen.
All right. Doesn't look like we have Guillermo back yet either. So why don't we just jump into it? It may just be a two-person panel, which is just fine, by the way. Rue, what are you doing right now? Let's start there.
Okay. Cut to the chase.
Yeah.
Yes. So I'm now I'm a software engineer on the repos team, which is we work primarily on the monolith. And what I'm currently working on is enabling a feature on the releases page that allows people to select the previous tag when they are creating a release. Before that, they were not able to select the previous tag. They were able to auto-generate release notes for whatever release they were making, but only with whatever was determined was the previous tag, by the algorithm. So this lets them kind of like surface that information, so they can select that from the UI.
Awesome. And you're at GitHub right now, right?
I am at GitHub right now. Yes.
Very cool. And Ashiga, I think, is back with us. So I'm going to go ahead and add her back. Ashiga, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Ashika. I am currently in my junior year at VIT Vellore, and I'm working as a security research and a technical writing intern at this cybersecurity firm in India, based in Bangalore, called CloudSec. Yeah.
Awesome. And Autumn, let's go back to you for a second. What are you doing right now?
Yeah, so I am working as a software engineer at a startup called SwagUp. Basically, whenever you get your swag packs from different companies you work for or at conferences or whatever, we're the people who help distribute those items across the world. And what I'm actually doing there is actually closer to a DevOps or SRE role. Basically, we have a lot of infrastructure that is a little bit old, kind of, like Web 2.0, low code, no code solutions. And so it is our job now, coming on as engineers, to take all of our low code stuff and modernize it into, something that actually looks like a real engineering stack. Highway, by the way.
I was going to say the infamous Way is here. That it's good to see that name pop up. Joining us from his vacation, I think, in England, which is really cool. And Guillermo, good to see you. Would you mind introducing yourself?
Hey everyone, my name is Guillermo. I graduated from UC Irvine in 2020, and I'm currently working as a software engineer at Intuit in the backend team.
Awesome. And Guillermo, we're going to stay with you for a second. How did you hear about the fellowship?
I heard about the fellowship first through one of my friends who did the fellowship back in 2019, and he was talking to me about his experience and what team he worked on. What project was it on? It was an iOS project, and he worked for a startup that was making their iOS MVP product for it. And I saw his progress and everything that he's done, and I really liked that to see that he was actually making progress in a project, because I've been hearing lots of stories of other places where people intern and they end up not doing much progress or learning as much. And so when I heard about all the good stuff about MLH through him, that's when I was like, oh, this might be something really interesting to check out.
It's something when I talk to alumni or fellows that are thinking about it, the first thing they usually say is, I was really excited about the fellowship because of the opportunity to learn in like a structured way, to actually build something, to work with the brands that you do, and to do it with people that are pretty like-minded. Ashika, how did you hear about the fellowship?
So mine is quite similar. So a senior of mine in college did the fellowship. I think he was in the first batch, like the 0th batch. And from him, I found out how cool this place was and what kind of exposure you get. Like you get to work on basically organizations that are putting out really, really good, cool. Am I back?
You are back. We lost you at Cuckoos. I don't think that's what you were saying, but it was.
Okay. I'll just start all over again. So a friend of mine did the fellowship. He was in the 0th batch, or the first batch. I'm not sure. So he told me about the kind of exposure you get here and how you get to work on like really, really cool projects from like these big organizations like Meta, GitHub, Adobe, and so forth. And I was just really excited to come into this place and learn in a really professional manner from everybody around me.
Awesome. And Autumn, how did you hear about the fellowship?
I'll be honest, I was just on LinkedIn and looking at a lot of different internships and job applications, just scrolling through them and applying to a lot of different things. And MLH was one of the first places that got back to me. So that's how I heard about it. I didn't really have any references or anything.
That's literally a very similar story where it's like, I will take internships that, reach back out to me. I heard horror stories about, how difficult it can be to manage your internship kind of search process, and how like cold some experiences can feel, right? Particularly with some of the larger companies. Yeah, for those that apply, it's definitely something where we really try to create a really warm experience, make sure everybody hears back from us. And even if you don't get in, you'll get some feedback. Rue, how did you hear about the fellowship, and what made you apply?
Yeah, so my story is kind of similar to Autumn's, actually. I had just finished a Udacity nano degree program, and I had done some learning, was actually in the Android space, and I was looking for practical experience because I had made some personal projects, but I had not worked on any teams. I hadn't really done any like real world projects, and I knew it was really time to start looking. And so I'm actually a career changer. So it was particularly challenging to find like internships that would make sense for me. And I just started Googling. I was looking for things like returnships for people who were coming back into the workforce after I took a maternity leave. That was that was the time during my life that I had actually started transitioning my career. And so, looking up internships, trying to figure out like some networking. I was on Women Who Code, looking to see what kind of opportunities they had to offer. And they were all basically saying, like, at this stage, many internships are already filled up, but you can keep looking. And, that's what I had done. I went looking for a returnship and some fellowship, Googling random things, and MLH came up. It was a perfect fit for me for that time. Yeah.
And in terms of like, what was, I would imagine this question is going to be fairly different. Like, what code sample did you submit, Rue?
So I submitted an Android project. It was Android was one of the languages that was available at the time. Java and Kotlin were one of the languages that I could have selected. And I submitted my Capstone project from Udacity, which was an app that I developed right around the time that COVID had started, that was helping people find local distributions of food for like parents whose kids were homeschooling, and many of them were used to having their kids eat lunch in school. And this, presented a whole big issue for them when it came to like finding ways to feed their kids lunch during the day when they were working, right? So that was an app that I worked on, and that was my capstone project, and that's what I submitted as my sample. It was actually not it was not fully fleshed out, but it had some excellent working pieces, and I was able to discuss them, with my interviewer, and it worked out.
What project is fleshed out, right? Like,
right.
Yeah, I would encourage a lot of people asking about portfolio pieces to submit. Believe it or not, it's more important that we're looking at a code sample that you've created, yourself or worked on in a group for a period of time. We're not looking for perfection. I think that's totally unreasonable. But Autumn, what did you submit when you applied?
Sure. So my submission was this kind of code that I wrote for processing user input in JavaScript. So if you remember, Flash games were a big thing in like the early 2000s. People would make like these cool games, and I would like to do something similar in JavaScript, but there isn't a lot of infrastructure for that. So I built this little UI library that will take mouse and keyboard input, read modifier keys for you, and handle a lot of stuff that ordinarily you would have to roll out yourself by adding like event listeners to all these different objects and stuff like that. And I chose this project because it kind of shows that I am it came from like this place of trying to develop other things, and I'm thinking about like what other developers might need to use, and it's actually published on npm right now, and it gets a whopping 3 downloads per week, which is amazing. I can't believe anyone's ever seen it before even. But yeah, so that's what I did, and so I chose something that kind of like shows that I'm involved in like this broader ecosystem of how development works.
The good news is, Autumn, you have all that SRE background, right, to handle all that traffic. So it's right on. You could that's great.
That's right. Those 3 downloads are never going to get me.
And Ashika, how about you? What did you submit when you were applying?
So I submitted a TypeScript backend project, like using TypeScript, Express, Mongo. So there's a popular game, Psych, like by Ellen. right? So like the app, like it's not that great to use. So what I did was like I wanted to recreate that game, but in a web environment. So I was basically making a web app for the same game, but with a like little tweak, like better UI, better features. So I was working on the backend part of it, and the reason I decided to submit that project was because it was the first time I was working on a full-fledged backend with sockets and everything. And I was also mentoring like two other friends of mine while I was making it. So it was like a big deal for me because it was the first time when I was like mentoring someone else while making something of my own.
And Guillermo, in terms of when you finally met, I mean, you talked a little bit about this, but who was your first project match? Who were you working with initially?
My first project match was with Meta. It was actually with the production engineering track. And that's when I started first learning everything about how to deploy web applications, any kind of web application that you can think of, and also how to configure a lot of AWS settings that eventually led me to really just break through a major understanding of how technologies work together and how they combine each other. And that was my first match. Yeah.
And second batch, what'd you work on?
The second match I worked on with Meta again, but this time I worked on the Ogly team. It was a open source project for helping machine learning engineers. We created a library for them that creates fake data or augmented data, like a, let's say like an image. You give it an image and then it gives you um, an image, but like distorted with black and white or filter colors and everything. And that will help the machine learning engineers create their model to try to detect fraud detection. That way they can prevent people from uploading copyrighted images or any media that violates the community guidelines that they have.
And Ashika, you were working on Adobe. What was your project? Ashika, we lost Ashika. Autumn, you talked a bit about what you were working on. Let's go over to you. What were you working on at your most recent batch at GitHub?
Yeah, so again, I worked with GitHub over the summer, and what we worked on was this YAML parser for GitHub Actions. So if you haven't used GitHub Actions before, basically it is a way to specify certain tasks that you want to automate for a repository. So for example, maybe every time someone makes a pull request to your repository, you want to automatically run some tests. And you can imagine that this involves a lot of different things. For each GitHub action you run, you have to like spin up a server and then have port all the code onto the server, and then run it all there and stuff like that. And so what ended up happening is that various teams throughout GitHub, from the UI designers to the backend people, were all kind of like building their own versions of how they're going to read and parse the YAML to understand what they actually have to do. So on the front end side, you want people who can actually like validate the YAML and make sure that the input is doing everything you want them to do. And on the other side, you have the backend people who actually have to understand like what the instructions are and how to convert that into like instructions for your servers and stuff like that. So basically at the company, we have been replicating this work over and over again of like reading the YAML files and understanding them. And our job was to kind of synthesize the knowledge of these different teams who had been solving this problem and build like this one unified parser that can solve this same problem for anyone who needs that problem solved. We had about 3 months on it, so we didn't do like everything possible imaginable with it. But I think we laid like a good groundwork for anyone who picks up the project after us to come back and hopefully build out a more fleshed out version.
And Rue, you were actually in the same kind of like class as Autumn was. Can you talk about just some more about what you were working on?
Yeah, sure.
During the program, yeah.
Yeah, so when I got placed on the repos team, there was actually like an internal transition going on. And there was a team that was kind of handing over responsibility to repos. And so it was an interesting time to come in onto the team because there was a lot of information that we were all learning together. So there were not a lot of like scoped out projects that were specific for interns. It was kind of like, let's all dabble at things together and figure it out, right? So when I first started, a couple of the projects I worked on in the beginning was doing some conversions between like the views that they had on releases and converting them over to view components. And one of the interesting things about coming onto this fellowship was that my background was in Android, but I was working primarily in Rails and Ruby. So there was a lot of learning going on there, just kind of learning how to understand, learning web dev in general. And once I, kind of got a handle on a little more on Rails, I worked on enabling like highlighting on the releases page and things like that. We did some exploratory sessions to see if it made sense to work on GPG signing of tags, which was in that same area of releases. Turned out it was a little bit out of scope for such a short period of the internship, but it was also in itself a learning experience, right? Because that's what you do when you're on these teams. Sometimes you go off and do these exploratory sessions and they don't necessarily pan out. So that in itself is a learning experience.
And just kind of staying with you, can you talk about your maintainer? Like, who was your project maintainer at GitHub and how did you work together?
Like my manager?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah. GitHub was an externship of sorts. Yeah. Who was your kind of technical point of contact at GitHub and how did you work together?
Yeah, so I got placed onto a team, like an existing team at GitHub, and my direct manager is my manager now, Tommy Petty. And then I kind of had like a buddy. It was more of like a buddy system where I was assigned to work with another engineer. We would do a lot of pairing sessions together. And so it was not the traditional kind of system that I guess they have in open source at the fellowship, where I think the pod works together on a big project. Is that, correct me if I'm wrong there? But here here we kind of worked on our own individual projects and then like went back to the pod and discussed what we were working on. The fellowship, the externship track is kind of like a different format, but yeah.
And Guillermo, I think you also have kind of two different fellowship experiences to pull from. Can you talk about your not your production engineering program, because that was a bit unique, right? But who was the maintainer engineering point of contact you were working with during your other experience?
I had actually two engineers that were working with me, and they were really accessible at any time that I needed them to be. So if I had any questions or concerns, I can just not email them, sorry. I can chat with them through their workspace. It's like their own version of Slack that they have for Facebook. And I would just post my question and they would give me a lot of guidance, like links, resources, and even sometimes comments on like what I should do. And it was very, very good feedback that they would give me, enough for me to figure out things on my own. And I like that because it didn't give me too much spoon feeding or hand holding. And it gave me just enough to be able to carry out myself and solve the issues that I had on my own. And it also taught me the value of like how to ask good questions and how to document questions. Sometimes I had a question that was like 2 paragraphs long because I had to give some context on what the issue I'm having was and what I'm trying to achieve. And they really taught me that that skill set of asking the right questions that I'm still using to this day, even at my new career at Intuit.
And Autumn, can you talk about your pod? We talk a lot about like a pod is such I feel like an internal word, right? We talk about pod leaders and pod activities. Can you talk about the experience you had during the program with your pod mates and pod leader?
Yeah, definitely. So a pod is what we describe. So the way the fellowship is structured is essentially there's, I guess, like maybe there's 150 fellows and there's 10 people per pod. So I guess like there's 15-ish pods. And so each pod is about 10 people. And that's kind of like your teammates almost when you're working on the fellowship. The amount that you interact with them is going to depend on like the kind of program you're doing. So like for production engineering, we were just like one unit trying to like absorb as much information as possible. And for the externship, actually our pod was split up into smaller teams, almost into like individual contributors to different projects. But basically they're going to be like the faces that you see in like your regular Zoom meetings for stand-ups and stuff like that. If you have questions, your pod leader is the person you're going to talk to. Your pod will sometimes have like events that are a lot of fun, like, game nights and whatever. So that's kind of like how the pod ecosystem works. And then there's also like cross-pod events and stuff like that. So basically, like, they're split up into like these smaller circles for ease of like management, I guess you could say.
And Rue, like, what made the fellowship fun for you?
It was really interesting to have like these two different ecosystems where you had they're both your work life, I guess, but one of them is a little bit more social and the other one is a little more professional, I would say. Because we had our stand-ups and our meetings and, sync ups in GitHub, but we also had this great fallback of people who were all more or less on the same level back at, MLH. And so if you had any questions that, let's say, you were too embarrassed to ask in a professional setting, you can always go back and ask your teammates. And there's like a nice camaraderie there, and everybody has each other's back. So it's, yeah. And just, see friendly faces every morning and know that you have this like routine where you can go in and talk to other people going through the same experience as you. It's really invaluable.
Can you talk a about how the fellowship helped you, Rue?
Mine's really straightforward.
Yeah.
I got a job at the end of it, so I would say that's a big help.
Jobs are good. Yeah, generally that's the idea. Yeah. Guillermo, same question over to you. Can you talk about how it helped you? I think we lost your audio. There we go.
Sorry. In terms of what it helped me a lot with communication. Not even so much on the technical skill sets, but a lot of it was really heavily growth on my communication skill sets. Being able to communicate efficiently, asking the right questions, making sure that when I do ask a right question, our problems get solved way much quicker. I saw a big increase in my throughput, my results. And one of the best ways was having, obviously the tech skills are also really important to have. You should have those under the belt, right? But those are things you can kind of learn on your own, reading books, practicing that. But interacting with people, engineers especially too, that's a new skill to develop that is really hard to develop with like on your own. You need to practice with someone. And that's why the MLH really helped me in increasing those aspects in my abilities for my career.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of people, a lot of questions about how, what to submit when people apply, a lot of questions about code samples. And I think the biggest thing that I hear consistently about what people learn is how to work in an engineering team, right? How to unblock yourself, how to surface things and kind of resolve blockers, right? So that you can contribute to the code base that you're working on. It is an acquired skill, right? I think so often at the beginning of the program in particular, you get fellows who are pretty reserved and almost like scared to speak up and say, hey, I'm stuck. And through the program, you see that there's a lot of tools and resources and best practices for how to ask questions, right? And how to unblock yourself and, how to troubleshoot and all of that. Autumn, same question to you. Can you talk about how the fellowship helped you, during and after the program?
Yeah, sure. So, honestly, I think one of the biggest helps is just having something nice on my resume that I could put like, MLH Fellow, that's very impressive. I came from a non-CS background. I actually majored in the humanities when I was in university, kind of switched into tech after that. So having kind of like this anchor point of like, this is like what I did in tech. That helps a lot for when you're setting out applications. It gives you something to talk about in interviews and stuff like that. I've told the same story of how I went from the humanities into tech over and over again for, God knows how many times. So that's probably the biggest thing, just having something nice on the resume to talk about. But I think another big thing that's maybe a little underrated is the networking aspect of it. So definitely at GitHub, I made a lot of, I was pretty close to my manager and the engineers I was working with. I still have their emails. I can just like catch up with them whenever I want. I have people out on LinkedIn, of course, too. And even with Jay, I also got an interview from you, which was pretty nice. So yeah, just the aspect of like networking with people, I think is really important for the fellowship as well.
Yeah, it's funny you bring that up, Autumn. Like I've trying not to, I wanted to bring this up organically. I think the really cool part about this program is like, I know each of you personally. A lot of members of the program know each other personally. And it does feel like so much more than an internship, right? It does feel like a community of people that you can tap into. So, you know, if I had to, right, I could tell everybody stories about each of you. I'm not going to do that, but it just makes the program that much more special, right? And that's what Autumn mentioned about really having a Rolodex of people that you could tap is 100% true. I think I leave every conversation with like, hey, if there's ever anything I can do for you, like reach out. And that goes across everybody who's working on the program. Rue, if you know, there's a bunch of people watching the live stream right now. No pressure. If you had to give them some advice, yeah, well, what would you tell them if they were considering the fellowship or on the fence?
I have to say, like, my biggest piece of advice, I guess, is more targeted to people who experience like anxiety like I do. And that's if it feels like something uncomfortable, you should challenge yourself to do it. When I first joined the fellowship, just getting on the morning calls to like speak to strangers on a daily basis was really challenging for me, right? And so getting that experience, the more often you do it, the less unpleasant it feels, I would say. And so having this kind of opportunity in the fellowship where you can make mistakes and you can do things that challenge you and scare you is so important before you go out there and you start applying to jobs and before you go on interviews, and just get that experience when you can within a supportive environment where you have people who are like oozing empathy, right? Like everyone at MLH just wants to have your back. They want you to succeed. And so I think it's so great to have that kind of experience before you go off into like an actual world scenario where sometimes people are not as encouraging, right? So that's
true.
my biggest piece is kind of like, I'll get outside your comfort zone and just give it a go.
Yeah. And the idea is we try to make it easy, right? All the people that we select to be pod leaders, Guillermo being one of them, after he finished the program, it's really important that, you know, that person cultivates a culture of comfort and security, right? We want people who are coming into the program to feel safe, right? Some people are asking questions about, you know, what about asking dumb questions? Like, yeah, the whole point of the program is to ask those questions, right? Even if they feel dumb, right? And get out of your own head and learn. Yeah, Autumn, same question to you. You know, if there's people on here who like have the link and they're like, oh, I'm not quite sure, what would you tell them?
Yeah, so first piece of advice, apply early. If I remember correctly, the MLH Fellowship does rolling submissions or rolling applications. So the earlier you apply, the better chance you have before all the slots fill up. Second, the code sample talk, I think, is the real determining factor. So you want to make it count. I would say have a plan for what you want to talk about to showcase your abilities as much as possible. Basically, you're just going to say, like, show me the code and then talk about it. So you just want to be like ready to go, just like answer all the questions they have, know your code front and back, show off all your knowledge. It's going to be the second thing. And the third thing is the MLH Fellowship, I think, really prizes people who are able to learn on their own and kind of, you know, go-getters who can go out and just work by themselves and make progress on their own. So if you can demonstrate that in your talks and in your interviews, that's going to help your application chances the most, in my opinion.
Yeah, we get a lot of questions about admissions best practices. And I just want to underscore, yeah, the earlier you apply, the better, right? It is part of it's definitely an application hack, right? You get your application in early, those spots definitely fill up. And Guillermo, and same question to you, right? Like somebody's on the fence, what are you going to tell them?
I'll definitely tell them to focus a lot on step-by-step. First, it's the essay. You really have to be able to communicate your what your desires are in tech. What do you want to do in tech as a career, right? Your endeavors. I think I was lucky because I was already prepared to answer essay questions since way back in like my first years of college. I had a friend from UC Berkeley who got the Bill Gates scholarship. I forgot what the actual name is called, but he really helped me a lot in just being able to write scholarship essays. And after I gained that skill set, I think going through the essay portions were not as difficult for me as it is for other people. And the second part is the project. Make sure you really document the project. I also work with the admissions team, and I've noticed lots of projects where there's no documentation. It's a one page or like one file project, and there's no system or architecture. What we like to see is we want to see something well documented, well built, good code practices that you can find. Whether it's Python, you should look those up. If it's JS, look those up. Any project that you work on, make sure you follow good practices. And last but not least, your communication skills, which is at the interview. If you're able to communicate what you did on your essay and your project in person or virtually, I think those are the three main ingredients for being able to succeed in the admissions.
And yeah, we're kind of coming up on the last 9 minutes or so here. I'm just going to put each of you on the spot, so I hope that's okay. But yeah, parting words, like what would you say about overall your experience and where you are now? Rue, start with you on the spot. Sorry.
Yeah. I think for me personally, MLH came at like the perfect timing for where I was, for where I was and what I needed at the time. And I would say that all the things that everybody has said are 100% true. You know, you have to get to the point where you're confident with your skill level. You have to know how to express yourself and communicate with people. But I would also like just challenge people that are on the fence kind of to try it out and apply anyway, right? Even if you're not 100% sure, even if you are not great with communication just yet, right? Like that's part of what you want to pick up at the fellowship, right? So I would say being genuine and honest about your intentions coming into the program and using that as a stepping stone to like get all these amazing resources that MLH has, right? Like if you can't, if you apply and you don't get in, you can apply again. I've seen many stories of people who have applied several times and had gotten in later down the line. And I still think it's super valuable, and like, don't get scared off by what, other intimidating applicants that may lead you to, not necessarily apply. I think try it out anyway.
Yeah. Guillermo, parting words.
Yeah, I think also in retrospect, adding on to Ruth, I think everything that I've been saying sounds like the perfect applicant, right? But there is no such thing as a perfect applicant. I think Ruth is definitely on the right track, and I apologize for scaring those who might have felt that way, like telling you all these advice to be like the perfect applicant. But in reality, yeah, I think definitely keep applying even if you don't feel confident, because that's the perfect applicant is the one that keeps growing. And if you don't really keep pushing towards getting in MLH or anywhere in your internship search, then I think you'll be a great candidate later on and wherever you go towards as a career.
And Autumn, parting words on your end.
Yeah, so not specific to MLH, but just in general in the world of technology, whatever it is you're doing, I think the most important thing is just to enjoy it, really, because like we're all here because we like coding, we like computers, and it's just fun. Like the first time you write a Python script and you see "Hello World" on the screen, you're like, that's cool. And you just want to chase that feeling, I think, as much as you can. So, when you're building a project, just enjoy like thinking about who's going to use it, how like, the little problems that you're solving. When you're sending your applications and you're doing interviews and stuff like that, enjoy the interviews too. Whoever your interviewer is, just, joke around with them a little bit, just have fun with it. When you're like, quote unquote, networking, I kind of hate networking as a concept because you're just making friends, right? You're just talking to people and being friendly with people. And that's just, this is just like what being a person is like. It's like this weird language you've developed around it, but really, like if you just talk to people and make friends with them and have fun with them, like that's what networking is. And then later, of course, you DM them like, hey, can you get me a referral? But like the first thing is make friends with them. Then after that, you ask for the referral. But yeah, there's always something to enjoy in this space of technology. I think that's all why we're all here, really. That's like how we got into it, because it was just fun the first time we did it. So just keep having fun, keep enjoying it, and I think you'll be okay. Even if you don't get in here, you'll get in somewhere.
Really well said. I think it's easy to get caught up in the world of like professional networking. And the truth is, right, what you're just trying to do is just elicit a reaction, right? Make yourself memorable. And more often than not, that is about authenticity, right? And being yourself and just connecting with somebody. So really well said. I want to thank all of you so much for your time and your stories. And yeah, that was just so wonderful to talk through. Really great start to the Friday. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. I hope you have a wonderful weekend. And I hope for those of you that are out there that are thinking about applying, I really hope you apply. And, we can welcome you into this great community. Yeah. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thanks so much.
Thanks for having us.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Enjoy your weekend.